Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Last week, Air Liquide started the production of carbon-free hydrogen in Bécancour, Quebec. When fully operational, the facility will produce 3,000 tons per year of green hydrogen using 20 megawatt PEM electrolyzers provided by Hydrogenics, now Cummins. This is presently the largest and most modern PEM electrolysis plant in the world. Last week as well, Hydro-Québec announced the construction of a huge electrolysis facility to supply 11,000 tons per year of green hydrogen to Enerchem. Enerchem, a Montreal-based company, is building a grassroots plant in Varennes that will transform organic waste into biofuels. The announced capacity is 125,000 cubic meters per year. Heavy-duty transportation, intensive mobility, and heavy industry are responsible for a significant share of CO2 emissions, above 25% in Quebec, and are difficult to electrify sectors. This is where carbon-free hydrogen can make a big difference, especially when dealing with hard-to-abate industries like those just mentioned. Hydrogen is no longer hype. It is becoming an industrial reality at an accelerated pace, a pillar for the energy transition in Europe and Eastern Asia, where significant investments have been planned. Momentum has also built in Canada, especially in Quebec, thanks to the massive availability of hydroelectricity and wind power resources. Polytechnique Montréal has recently completed an in-depth study on the economics and technological trends in hydrogen production and usage. We also formulated development avenues for the future of green hydrogen for the Quebec government. Should you be interested by our conclusion proposals, this public domain report is available on the Transition énergétique Québec website. I'm seizing the opportunity today to announce the creation by Polytechnique Montréal of the Institute on Sustainable Engineering and Net Zero Economy. Gathering resources from our university and teaming up with Quebec Innovation Ecosystem, this institute will focus on developing new knowledge and new technologies to decarbonize the economy in line with the ongoing energy transition and government green plan. Partnering with the private and public sector, the Institute R&D results will be translated into breakthrough applications for the benefit of industry and society. Stay tuned, as we will be making further announcements in a few weeks. It will be related to our first green chemistry technology platform based on carbon capture and conversion from industrial flue gases using green hydrogen. Let me now turn the virtual podium to Richard Hudson, who has kindly accepted our invitation to moderate this panel. A graduate of Harvard College and a former Knight Fellow at MIT, Rich has been a leading science and technology journalist in Europe. After 25 years for the Wall Street Journal, including 6 years as the managing editor of the European edition, he co-founded in 2004 Science Business Publishing, a media and communication company focused on research and innovation in Europe. He is currently editor-in-chief and vice chair of its board of directors. Rich, please.
Thank you very much, Philippe. That's a very interesting sequence of events there, and congratulations on the new center that you're opening at the Polytechnique. It sounds very interesting, and it fits into what I would say has been an extraordinary rush of new investments and policy announcements around much of the world about hydrogen in really just the past 18 months, I would say. It's really, as a journalist watching it, I've been very impressed at how quickly this whole issue of hydrogen has come together. And indeed, there was just last week, the Canadian government announced an additional climate funding, which includes money for hydrogen. So we will get into that, no doubt, as we proceed. To discuss why hydrogen, what's the problems with it that need to be solved, and how we move ahead with it. I'm delighted to be joined by a panel of experts on this from different sectors. First, I'd like to introduce Gwenaëlle Avice-Huet. She is the executive vice president of ENGIE, the French energy multinational, French-based, I should say. And she is specifically, among her duties, is she's head of renewables. And ENGIE has announced a very ambitious strategy to expand its use and production and delivery of renewables over, I think, nearly a 50% increase in only by the end of next year. Quite an ambitious plan. So we will hear more about that from Gwenaëlle. Also joined by Daryl Wilson. He is the executive director of the Hydrogen Council. That's a global initiative of energy industry and transport companies that actually began, I believe, Daryl, in 2017 at the Davos World Economic Forum. So it's about hydrogen and basically sharing information and promoting hydrogen among these major companies. I'm also joined then by Massimo Mondazzi. He's the chief operating officer of ENI, the Italian ENI, I should say, ENI, the Italian energy multinational. And it too has been announcing new investments in hydrogen, including, I think, a plan, Massimo, to have the first electrolyzers, hydrogen electrolyzers operating in Italy in 22-23. We have plans elsewhere in the world that we'll hear about. And lastly is Mathieu Payeur. He's the director of energy strategies, the energy transition, fundamentally, at the Quebec Ministry of Energy and Natural Resources. And he has been working on a $6 billion Canadian plan for energy transition through 2026, I believe it now goes. Anyway, it's quite an ambitious plan that we will hear more about. So that is our panel, all in all. And just to begin it, Daryl, I'm going to pick on you first. For those of us who are not deeply into the hydrogen sector, what on earth are we talking about here? Why hydrogen? Last we heard, it blew up in the Hindenburg. So why are we talking about hydrogen?
Richard, hydrogen is kind of the last stop in the energy chain. So we've gone from coal to wood to oil to natural gas. And along that journey, we've been dropping off more and more carbon. And today we recognize that we need to lose the carbon in our energy system almost completely in order to save the planet. And hydrogen is the last stop. It's a molecule that contains no hydrogen, but can very well deliver energy. You cannot dig it up out of the ground, so it's not like oil and coal and natural gas. It's not an energy source. It's an energy carrier. And so in that sense, it's very like electricity. We carry energy through wires in our society using electrons and electricity. Similarly, hydrogen can be used to convey energy to mobility applications, to decarbonize industry like glass, steel, cement making, ammonia manufacturing, and also as an aid to integrate renewables. So a very important part of this story, Quebec having great hydro resources, there's a way to store energy in the form of hydrogen and move energy to where we need it, making hydrogen from water through hydroelectricity to generate the input energy to split the molecule of water into the constituent parts of hydrogen and oxygen.
Take that a bit slower, Betty. So water is H2O. H is for hydrogen. O is for oxygen. Is it that simple?
It's that simple. Most of it, us did that in chemistry class in high school, where we split water into hydrogen and oxygen. So this particular process is part of the technology that supports hydrogen as an energy vector. And yes, indeed, electrical energy is used to split the water and to recover the hydrogen, which then can carry the energy at very high efficiency to other uses. So this is a new way of moving energy in our society and storing energy in our society for many, many different uses.
And just another question about how this would work. So you made the comparison to electricity moving as a carrier of energy. But so then what are we talking about? Are we talking about pipelines of hydrogen, or how does it move around?
as we sit in our homes, we don't see the big energy system behind us. ENGIE and ENGIE, of course, are working to support that energy system on a daily basis. But 80% of our energy or more is coming to us in a molecular form. It's natural gas or oil or gasoline or diesel. These are all molecules. 20% of our energy is coming to us in the form of electricity. And it's the molecular side of energy that hydrogen has the ability to supplement and ultimately replace without any carbon impact. So a very exciting transition in our society, and a place where Canada has led for many years in the technology. Ballard Power Systems from Vancouver, Hydrogenics in Ontario, and many other research institutes across the country have been major contributors to the global effort of commercializing hydrogen.
Okay, all right. So Gwenaëlle, would you like to come in? Why hydrogen? Why would your company be investing in hydrogen? Why is it? Does it solve the climate problem? Really? Does it create new problems? Why?
Yes, thank you very much. A very good question. In fact, what we're doing is that we're discussing with many clients in there saying, I want to decarbonize. I want to have a meaningful impact on climate change, but I don't know exactly how to do that. And therefore, we present different solutions to clients, being like greening their supply on electricity, also presenting energy efficiency measures and things like that, numbers of different solutions in order to decarbonize. But what we see is that there are numbers of sectors that consume hydrogen for their own industrial process. I am thinking about refineries, ammonia, methanol, or chemistry in general. These industrial processes require hydrogen for their own manufacturing process. And therefore, if they want to decarbonize, it's not only greening their electricity supply, it's greening their H2 supply, their hydrogen supply. And to do that,
Gwenaëlle, where do they get it now? Typically,
they use it. They have hydrogen being supplied based on natural gas. It's a SMR production, so it's traditional production, and there is a huge demand right now for them to green their footprint. And the way to do that is really to decarbonize their consumption on hydrogen. And that's where there is the biggest potential, because we are talking about big numbers there. They are consuming green hydrogen on a large scale. And therefore, we need to develop electrolyzers, as mentioned before, on a very large scale to meet their expectations. And that's where we see...
Sorry, the electrolyzers are the devices that actually do that.
Exactly. The electrolyzer is exactly the split of the water into H2, and therefore you produce hydrogen for their consumption on a large-scale basis in order to decarbonize their footprint, turning from gray hydrogen into green hydrogen. So this is the transition that we are seeing, and we see numbers of clients that are asking for that. Refineries, ammonia, mining industry, and things like that. So it would be for the industrial process themselves, or for large-scale, large heavy mobility, for example, like trucks and things like that, for which hydrogen is a solution also. So it's another angle.
For transport. What is the transport angle, Gwenaëlle?
So for trucks, it's turning from diesel into hydrogen, and therefore you decarbonize. It's a way to reduce the climate change footprint. So there are numbers of different possibilities, but the biggest sectors as consuming hydrogen and for which there is a footprint, there is a tremendous potential is for the industry. First, industry consuming hydrogen, and second is for the heavy mobility. And third, you have also the possibility to store hydrogen as a way to store, a bunch of energy. So there is a storage component. But I would say that first application is really what's demanding, what's requested by big clients on their own consumption, meaning industry, manufacturing industry, and second, about heavy mobility.
Okay. Massimo, so why, for Eni, why hydrogen?
Why hydrogen? Mainly because the necessities to tackle the decarbonization process in the so-called hard to abate. So I share what the other panelists have said a few minutes ago. But I would like to focus the attention on the hard-to-abate sectors, because hydrogen today is the only possibility that we have available for the decarbonization. While for transport, maybe there are additional way, maybe the biofuels. So there are different sources, decarbonized sources to tackle the issue. For the so-called hard-to-abate, so cement, paper, petrochemicals, steel, there are no alternatives. And just to give you an example, in Italy, they represent more or less 20% of the overall CO2 emission. So the issue is how to tackle this 20% in order to get to the final result. And now in Europe is a 55% CO2 emission reduction versus 1990. So the effort is a absolutely a relevant effort. And because we don't have enough decarbonized sources today to get there using just one source, what we have to do is to use all the available sources to tackle and to get there, to come to this 55% reduction.
Massimo, do you have any idea as to then, if you look at it globally, what percentage of the total energy supply might we end up with hydrogen?
Okay, the energy supply in terms of hydrogen, so could be today is important. Today, substantially, there is no hydrogen market wherever in the world, because today hydrogen is substantially self-consumed. So people produce hydrogen throughout steam metal reformers to cover their own consumption. So there is no a transportation system, there is no a market, there is no a price for significant exchange of volumes of hydrogen. And there are no subsidies that are fundamental input to start this process. That will be even a bit more complicated than what we experience for renewables. Why? Because as you produce energy throughout the renewable sources, the utilization is the common utilization. You don't have to adapt your own facilities in order to receive energy produced throughout renewables. So what should be subsidized is the production. For hydrogen is something different, because to use hydrogen, certainly you have to produce hydrogen better, much better decarbonized hydrogen. And you need a subsidy to do so, because today the cost at this level of the CO2 certificates price, definitely you need a subsidy. But at the same time, industries receiving hydrogen should adapt their own facilities. And this adaptation, this upgrade in their facility require an additional subsidy. So the framework is a bit more complex, and the need that we have in order to tackle the issue of the overall emission is to start as soon as we can.
Okay.
So from one side, we have to develop more and more the renewable base, the renewable capacity, in order to create such a spare production that would be the necessity capacity to not only to, I would say, to cover the energy demand that today is assured by the hydrocarbon, so gas mainly, but also for this hard-to-abate. So this will be much more important. And then alternative solutions such as the CCS, the carbon capture, that is an alternative way that could be even available now, where you have depleted reservoir, to produce decarbonized hydrogen, capturing the CO2 and reinjecting the CO2 underground.
Okay, all right. So Mathieu, let me come to you. So you're in the Quebec government. So why hydrogen? Because I mean, for the rest of the world, when you talk about energy, most people think about Quebec and hydro, so hydroelectric power. So what are you planning? Why?
Well, they're right. When it comes to electrifying, of course, we do have a lot of green electricity in Quebec, and that just makes a lot of sense to use this energy. So my role at the ministry is actually, one part of the role is to look at the forecast consumption in the future. So looking at what will be the consumption and which energy should be used in which sector. And basically, we have some modelization team working on that. And when we think about hydrogen, actually the elements that comes to mind on the energy perspective is the capacity for hydrogen to link the overall energy systems together. And this is really a key component when we think about energy transition. Historically, we look at the energy grids for natural gas. We look at the electrifying grid, and they're pretty much separate because they're all dedicated to one applications. Now, with the energy transition that we're trying to achieve, basically, we want to remove everything that has fossil fuels in it, and we want to go to renewables. So we have to rethink the overall energy systems, and hydrogen can play a role there. One other aspect that does come to mind, and it has been mentioned in the panel already, but the idea that hydrogen can be used as a complementary technology in the overall package of solutions to decarbonize. So on the government's perspective, I would say the objective is to electrify. So of course you can do that because it's more efficient. But then it comes into certain applications where you just cannot use electrification directly, or you have some consideration for the peak demand. So you have to think about the energy system as a whole, once again, to look at what are the most efficient applications to use direct electricity, where you can use other types of energy, and where you can use hydrogen. So I think in a nutshell, basically, hydrogen can play a major role in ways to help us electrify indirectly, but cannot be electrified directly, or because of technical or economical reasons. So this is one element that comes to mind. The other aspect, and of course, my role is more on the energy sector, but when we think more broadly about the climate change problems, we do have to look at hydrogen on the other aspect, and this already has been said, of course. But so we do have all the energy applications for hydrogen, but hydrogen also has to play a major role as in the chemical industry, as it was already mentioned. So basically, we have to turn all the hydrogen that is already consumed now, turn that hydrogen from gray to green. Well, so
there are a couple of colors here.
Gray,
green. Well, green, I guess that's renewable. I mean, that's hydrogen that's produced from hydro or wind or solar, right?
Right. So
green.
It's low carbon, I would say, or no carbon. For us, of course, it's electricity driven.
Gray. Pretty? I mean, what's gray?
Gray is the SMR approach that mentioned Gwenaëlle. And so we take the CH4, which is natural gas, and we split it up. So
methane.
There's some carbon that is released, and of course we remain with the hydrogen molecule.
Okay.
And there's the
all right, and I gather there are other colors too, but we'll save this
from nuclear.
Massimo?
There is the pink one from nuclear.
New pink. Oh my! I'm trying to imagine where that color comes from.
Blue with CCS, green from renewable, gray from steam reformer, from gas without carbon capture sequestration.
Okay, well, we joke about this, but this is a rather complicated topic, and I can see why you develop colors to try to simplify the discussion. Of course, you have to know what the colors refer to, but anyway, but let's go on with this. The one question that none of you have actually answered, though, is what was on my mind. When you do the sums, the math of using hydrogen, do you actually get a net reduction in carbon emissions? Has anybody calculated what that would be?
So the Hydrogen Council has done a fair amount of work on this and published studies, which are listed on the website, hydrogencouncil.com. And we'll have a new study evaluating decarbonization pathways to be published in January next year. But absolutely, this is a very powerful vector for the decarbonization of many different uses of energy in our society. And the extent of decarbonization is substantial, typically in the range of 90 to 100%. So the kind of gains that we need to make in this mission to mitigate climate change and decarbonize our energy pathways, small steps are not enough. And we need these giant leaps forward of 90 and 100% decarbonization of certain applications so that ultimately we can realize our goals and save the planet. So big steps are needed and hydrogen can deliver.
Well, okay, so if hydrogen is that cool, why isn't it everywhere already? I mean, surely there must be technical or financial or regulatory problems or trade problems. So what's the obstacles?
So in Canada, we have a long history here. Some of the original pioneers in the field in the modern hydrogen industry actually came out of Quebec. Pierre Rivard founded Hydrogenics along with Joe Cardinelli. And then Jeffrey Ballard founded Ballard. And some Canadians will remember the time when those stock prices hit very high levels and then they later lost money. So we had this big expectation cycle that started back in the 1990s. And then, of course, disappointment followed. Now here, coming out of the chasm of death, as it's often called, is the renaissance of the industry, all driven by cost reduction and scale. The main impediment recently has been, it's just been too expensive. And many of the technologies we're aiming at replacing or supplementing have more than a 100-year head start. So competing with those incumbent players is very difficult. In January of this year, the Hydrogen Council published a study where we collated all of the data from our almost 100 members, and they reported on their expectation that as this technology scales, what's going to happen to the cost? And it's a good news story. There's a virtual cycle here, and we've all seen this movie before. We've seen it with wind and solar. Not so long ago, we remember that wind and solar were very expensive, but today, some of the lowest cost ways of delivering energy for our uses in society come from wind and solar. That same movie is about to play out once again when it comes to hydrogen. And as this industry scales, much like the wind and solar renewable side of things, the cost will come down very dramatically. We're talking about 20, 30, 50% reductions over the course of time in the next 10 years. And this will bring these applications using carbon-free hydrogen into the money and become economic. Now, some of that journey needs to be supported, as it was with renewables, with strong policy incentives. But the other good news is around the world, we're seeing many, many countries join now in regions like Europe, Japan, Korea, China, with very strong policy that supports this journey and adds incentive for the decarbonization to happen on an accelerated basis. But in contrast to the past, we've got acceleration going on here.
Okay, but before we get into the issue of subsidies, which also Massimo had mentioned earlier, that when you talk about wind and solar, there were also technical issues that needed to be resolved. That is, innovations that would make it more efficient to produce. So are we lacking technology still? Do we still need heavy innovation?
There's more than 30 or 40 years already gone into the technology side of this equation. And actually, that is not today an impediment. All of these technologies work. Many of them are in fairly common use, in fact. But the cost and scale issue is definitely an impediment that's yet to be fully overcome. But the journey is there. The potential is there. And thankfully, the confidence has now come with strong driving forces and policy to move ahead.
Okay. So if I could turn to Massimo and Gwenaëlle. So where do either one of you would like to go first? So where are the obstacles? Why you've started to do deals with customers and with others, but what are the problems on the demand side and on the supply side that need to be fixed? Let's leave the regulatory issue and the subsidy issue for a little bit later.
Okay. So if I to pass my view on this, certainly the cost is the the most relevant issue now, because if I can give you the European experience now and mentioning very simple numbers, in Italy, where the major part of the renewable energy is produced throughout the solar panel. I would like to remember the solar panel as a load factor more or less of 20%, means that they produce energy for the 20% of the overall available time in a day or in a year. It means that the efficiency to produce hydrogen throughout the electrolyzers is very low. And today, just to give you a number, the cost for each kilo of hydrogen should be in the range of 6.5 euro. While generating gray hydrogen, so throughout gas, the cost is 1.5. The first one is decarbonized. Absolutely. What is in the middle? In the middle, there is Germany. Why Germany and potentially UK? Because they have a lot of offshore wind capacity available, and offshore wind has a load factor in the range of 60%. It means that the efficiency in the process to produce hydrogen should be much higher than using PV. And so the cost is now put in the middle, so in the range of 4 euro per kilo. So anyway, there is a difference. And the difference could be filled in by the cost of the CO2 certificates. The higher are the certificate cost, and the smaller should be the difference between decarbonized versus carbonized sources. Having said that, it is certainly an issue from an economic point of view, because definitely you mentioned the incentives that maybe we can deal with in a while. But definitely that's an hurdle. And the second hurdle that is driven by the cost that impede the demand up to now is the transportation. The transportation of hydrogen is not so easy. Hydrogen could be even a bit dangerous. And
Massimo, that's actually one of the questions that we just got from the audience. How do you transport hydrogen? So explain that.
Definitely now, the way to transport hydrogen, I said before that today the majority of hydrogen is self-consumed. So company produce hydrogen where there is the consumption. We produce hydrogen in the same fence of the refineries. In the refinery, there is a small steam reformer to produce hydrogen that is used into the refinery. So transportation through trucks can be done, but you can understand the quantity are small, and the regularity of the supply definitely is not the same, and the regularity to supply hydrogen for a big industry. You cannot supply hydrogen for a big steel plant throughout trucks, but you need a pipe. And the pipe should be a dedicated one. Why? Because the molecule of the hydrogen is really very small, much smaller than CO2 and much smaller than methane. So leaks from the pipeline can be definitely avoided, and they are an issue. So only the last pipes that has been put online with some special metals can be the right one to transport hydrogen. So in a nutshell, you need a specific transportation pipeline system to transport hydrogen. That's the reason why the first use for hydrogen cannot really spread, but it should be devoted to industrial district in which you put the hydrogen production. So you reduce the transportation issue. And then as long as the market takes place, certainly you will see the transportation system enlarging more and more, making the distribution of hydrogen really a reality. But it will take years. It doesn't mean that we don't have to start today, but the best way to start is to tackle the issue talking about district industry per district industries.
Okay, Gwenaëlle, if I can come to you on the this issue on the maybe what's the obstacle on the demand side? ENGIE has done several deals. You had a big deal you announced recently supplying Microsoft with hydrogen. I guess for their servers and cloud services, is that right?
Well, we are supplying Microsoft from wind and solar, and not yet hydrogen, but maybe the next step. And we have been announcing last week also a big contract with Amazon on a 650 megawatt of renewables in Italy, France, and in North America. What we see is numbers of discussion happening either from these tech companies, but also the industrial segments that we mentioned before, like ammonia and refinery, etc., but also from the mining industry. We have large-scale project, and when we say large-scale, is really like double-digit megawatt, meaning more than 10 megawatt, like 30 megawatt or even more, 100 megawatt. And this is big. In this environment, electrolyzers, as we mentioned before, this is big. And if we want to have this decarbonized scenario where you have hydrogen being deployed on a large scale, we need to move fast and we need to think scale, because we'll need both fast and scale. Scale because it matters. On renewables, we reached very competitive prices because scale was rich, because manufacturing companies doing like solar panel or wind turbines were manufacturing in a very efficient way. And we need that for H2. So today, what we see really in the discussion we're having with numbers clients is really the ability to pay for the difference between the gray H2 and the green H2. Most of the time, they're ready to pay a little bit more because there is a prime in terms of image, in terms of commitment, and because they are more and more committed to ESG principles. But is it enough? When it's twice more
ESG.
or 3 times more, ESG is all the commitment that you are having on environmental, social, and governance topics. Okay. And all those commitments, that matters today. Shareholders are looking at these commitments in addition to the financial performance of a company. So they are looking at both elements. And so what we see today is that we see some room, some ability to pay additional premium for this green hydrogen, but the gap is huge. Huh? We have to be realistic. It's twice more expensive or 3 times more expensive, depending on geographies, etc. So in our discussion, we target the specific countries where we can have renewables being developed at scale and very cheap. And so basically that's why we are developing, for example, in South Africa, because solar, large scale, very easy, very cheap, etc., or in Australia or in Chile, etc. We are looking at renewable, large scale, cheap, and also scale of the electrolyzers in order to have this scale effect when we develop a given project for a given client. And many of our developments are on site for a given client. So you avoid all those transportation costs, and it's really on site for a given client.
Okay, but then so let me come to you, Mathieu, and then because now we get into the government discussion a little bit on these issues of subsidies. I'm just trying to understand, what is the debate that would actually be going on, say, in the Quebec government about whether or not it's worthwhile subsidizing take-up in some way? How do you make such a case like that when there are so many competing and urgent demands on public finance?
That's an excellent question, and I'll give you my take on that. I think the key element here is to look at the objective. So on my perspective, the government is not selecting a technology. It is establishing what are the targets to be met, and then providing the market with the tools to get to this market, to this market. So basically, now we're starting the work here in Quebec for a national strategy on hydrogen and bioenergy, which should be released next year. And what we have to look at is what is the best places and applications for hydrogen in our specific context. And then all the policy and all the other elements that should come with the strategy should be put in place. But there's some work to be done. And on the financial aspect, because it's a key component, there's lots to be done. Subsidies is, and we do have a lot of incentive programs in our organization. So we're really using this incentive approach a lot. But I think for the proportion, the quantities that we're looking at, because we do have to have some kind of scale, we do have to have some policies and tools that are more structural than incentive programs. That's well, in some cases we can. So
structural. I'm not following you.
Yeah. So basically, when we look at our current situation in Quebec, we do have a cap and trade system, which allows the market actually to finance the low emissions projects. So basically, when we try to compare or trying to get rid of the gray hydrogen for having green hydrogen, of course, there is a premium to be absorbed. So the question is, how do we absorb this premium? And some cap and trade or other CO2 emission trade systems could play a role to put a price on the CO2 emissions.
Okay.
And so that can provide the private sector with financial support that they need for investing and choosing to invest in this.
Okay, let's. If I could turn to the industry executives there. So let's be blunt. What are you asking for?
You need a subsidy in order to have the demand in place. Otherwise, no one will buy the decarbonized hydrogen at the market price, because the alternatives, including the CO2 cost today, are cheaper than decarbonized hydrogen. So that's the situation. So
okay, but you talked to Massimo. You talked about a more than €4 difference in price. Are you asking the government to put up that difference?
I'm asking something different. Just to complete the numbers I told you, there is an additional hydrogen, the blue hydrogen, so the decarbonized hydrogen throughout CCS, so carbon capture sequestration. And in the range of prices I gave to you, the blue hydrogen cost €2 per kilos. So it means that with a smaller subsidy, you can have a decarbonized hydrogen. So having a certain amount of money, certainly you can have much more hydrogen available without jeopardizing your effort to decarbonize the overall energy, electricity generation throughout renewables. This is a great advantage. So we are talking about an energy transition. The transition is a journey. Is a journey made by steps, and to be very efficient in this journey doesn't make any sense to be fully concentrated since the beginning in a technology that is not really up to scale right now. And definitely, I'm talking about the hydrogen generated by solar. So today, while we expect an upgrade in the technology, making the cost much lower than today, and the quantities available much higher than today in terms of renewable generation, no doubts that recurring to different sources of decarbonized energy is a must. And certainly, the first steps should be devoted to the carbon capture, because carbon capture is a reality. It allows you to capture up to 90% of the overall emission, and this is something that is available in huge quantities right now. The colleagues from ENGIE make an example mentioning 60 megawatt of renewable capacity to generate green hydrogen. My experience is that even using 100 megawatt of renewable solar capacity to generate green hydrogen, it will allow us to replace between 2 and 3% of the overall hydrogen required by one refinery. So nothing.
Okay.
So we must be very pragmatic in approaching such an exercise, the overall decarbonization step by step, having the idea about which is the technology that could maximize at the existing technology the result. Waiting for maybe additional tools and additional technology, maybe the electrolyzers could be much more efficient in the next 10, 15 years. That is definitely expected, because the carbon budget is a budget. The more you use such a budget in the shortened period of time, the less will be the remaining spare capacity in the future.
Okay, all right. Massimo, you just cited ENGIE research. I think Gwenaëlle might want to say a word about that or so. But
no, I mean, you're absolutely right. I think that there is a journey. There is a path with different colors of hydrogen, including the blue one referred by Massimo around CCS. We know that this can be part of the journey. And at the end of the day, the end goal is to have it green. And the question is the rhythm with the different colors of hydrogen. It is really that question that is raised. How fast will green hydrogen being developed, and how fast blue hydrogen will being developed? But at the end of the day, there is an end goal and there is different pathway to reach it.
But now a problem with blue, as you call it, carbon capture and storage, is that, well, it hasn't gone very well, the development of that. I mean, Norway, yes, huge storage, but within the EU, under their energy plan, they had a very hard time getting that going in a big way. So how realistic is it?
So just maybe two comments. First thing is that in the past, we had difficulties to justify CCS investments because also the CO2 price was not there. At the European Union, in the past years, we had very depressed CO2 price. Now with the market stability reserve and the way it's functioning, it's better, it's increasing, and it's giving more momentum, but it was not the case in the past. Second comment, our end goal right now at ENGIE is really to emphasize the green hydrogen, and meaning that all our investments are dedicated to green hydrogen, even though we perfectly understand that there is the pathway and some other competitors are working on the blue hydrogen, because there is this pathway, this journey that is ongoing. But as of ENGIE, our commitment to that is around green hydrogen. And now there is room, because at the end of the day, the decarbonization is not one-size-fits-all option. It really depends on the geographies, on the request from the clients, and on the ability for the governments to implement the decarbonization roadmap that they are setting. And what we should be very positive about is that at the European Union, what happened this week is incredible. With the commitment to decarbonize by 55% in 2030, it's like tomorrow. And to do that, H2 will be a key component, will be a key element to reach those targets. And that's why we should be optimistic, even though, yes, it's a journey. Yes, it's difficult. Yes, there are many hurdles in front of us, but there is this momentum happening. And look at all the industry talking about it right now in this conference, but not only talking, investing on concrete projects. And that's why I'm positive about hydrogen.
Okay. All right. Well, Daryl, let me come to you lastly. We have about a minute left. What, in your council, what are all of the companies saying that governments should do internationally?
This is not an either-or bifurcated discussion. Actually, there's a huge amount of shared understanding about the goals and objectives and targets, and the European governments have announced very, very large sums of money to support and advance the objectives that we're talking about today. The council will release a report in January totaling this up, but if I could foreshadow, we estimate it's more than 50 billion that has been allocated for the advancement of hydrogen as an energy vector on the public side, and likely more than 200 billion on the private side. So these are very, very large capital commitments now that are starting to flow. That's internationally around the world. So we'll release that report in January with more specifics. But we count up more than 250 investment projects in our investment tracker at this point. So this issue is absolutely moving with real money behind it, and is a joint effort on the behalf of industry that wants to see these objectives move forward, and governments as well.
Okay. All right. Well, with that, I'd like to thank all of you for participating in this discussion. And we are going to be watching very closely how this technology develops, and indeed also looking at what new innovations come out of the laboratories at the Polytechnique and elsewhere in the world to speed this along. So thank you all very much, and see you next time, I guess. Okay. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you. Bye for now.